Nora's world shattered when she saw him across the hospital waiting room. Dennis Hayes, the billionaire CEO she'd given everything to 7 years ago, now holding the hand of a stunning blonde woman while discussing treatment options for their daughter. But the girl in the hospital bed wasn't theirs. She was Nora's, their daughter. The child Dennis never knew existed, and when their eyes met across that sterile room, Nora realized her carefully guarded secret was about to explode in the most devastating way possible. Before we dive into this absolutely heart-wrenching story of hidden truths and shocking revelations, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You're about to witness a story so emotional and unexpected that you'll be glued to your screen until the very last word. Trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. The pediatric oncology ward of St. Catherine's Hospital buzzed with the quiet efficiency of medical professionals who dealt with life and death every day. Nora Rodriguez sat beside her 7-year-old daughter Emma's hospital bed, her fingers gently stroking her dark hair as she slept fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights. The chemotherapy had taken its toll, her once thick curls now barely covering her small head, her olive skin pale and drawn. But even weakened by illness, Emma was unmistakably her father's daughter. The same strong jawline, the same distinctive cleft in her chin, the same way her left eyebrow arched slightly higher than her right when she was thinking. Features that Nora saw every day but had spent 7 years praying no one else would recognize. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Emma's oncologist, stood in the doorway with a clipboard and the kind of expression that made Nora's stomach clench with dread. "Could we speak privately?" Nora glanced at her sleeping daughter, then followed Dr. Martinez into the hallway. The conversation that followed would change everything. "I'm afraid Emma's condition has worsened," Dr. Martinez began carefully. "The current treatment isn't responding as we'd hoped. We need to discuss more aggressive options, including experimental treatments that our standard insurance doesn't cover." Nora felt the walls closing in. As a single mother working 2 jobs, teaching elementary school during the day and cleaning offices at night, she barely scraped by even with Emma's basic treatments covered by her insurance. "How much are we talking about?" "The experimental program runs about $200,000 over 6 months. There are charity programs we can apply for, but the waiting list is long, and frankly..." Dr. Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. "Emma doesn't have months to wait." Nora's legs nearly gave out. She'd already mortgaged her small house, maxed out every credit card, sold everything of value she owned. There was nothing left to sell, no one left to ask for help. "I'll find a way," she whispered, the same words she'd been saying for months. But this time, even she didn't believe them. That evening, as Nora sat researching experimental cancer treatments and charity foundations on her laptop, a news alert popped up that made her blood run cold. Dennis Hayes, CEO of Hayes Industries, was donating $50 million to establish a new children's cancer research wing at St. Catherine's Hospital. The photo showed him shaking hands with the hospital administrator, his familiar smile lighting up those penetrating blue eyes that haunted Nora's dreams. The same eyes her daughter had inherited. 7 years earlier, everything had been different. Nora had been 22, fresh out of college with a teaching degree and dreams of changing the world one student at a time. She'd been volunteering at a Literacy Foundation gala, helping coordinate the silent auction while trying to network with potential donors for her inner-city school program. The event was unlike anything Nora had ever experienced. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, the soft murmur of conversations worth millions of dollars. She felt completely out of place in her modest black dress from Target and shoes she'd borrowed from her roommate. "Having trouble with that projector?" a deep voice had asked behind her. Nora turned to find the most handsome man she'd ever seen watching her struggle with the presentation equipment. He was tall, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her nervous exterior to something deeper. "Just a loose connection," she managed, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the cable. "I think I've got it." The screen flickered to life, displaying the Foundation's mission statement clearly. A small cheer went up from nearby staff members. "Impressive," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Dennis Hayes." Nora's breath caught. Dennis Hayes. Everyone knew that name. Hayes Industries was one of the country's most successful tech companies, and Dennis was known as much for his business acumen as his reputation as one of New York's most eligible bachelors. "Nora Rodriguez," she replied, shaking his hand and hoping he couldn't feel how nervous she was. "I'm just a volunteer coordinator." "The person who keeps everything running smoothly," Dennis said with a smile that made her heart skip. "That makes you pretty important." What followed was the most magical evening of Nora's life. Dennis stayed by her side as the formal program ended, genuinely interested in her work with underprivileged children and her dreams of educational reform. When he suggested they get some air on the hotel's terrace, Nora knew she should be helping with cleanup, but something about his earnest expression made her nod. The city sparkled below them as they talked until nearly midnight. Nora found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her fears about making a real difference, her struggles growing up in poverty, her determination to break the cycle for other children. "You could change so many lives," Dennis had said softly, his voice full of conviction. "I can see it in how passionate you are about these kids. They're lucky to have someone who cares like you do." When he offered to drive her home, Nora almost said no. But there was something about the evening that felt suspended outside of reality, and she found herself accepting. They sat outside her modest apartment building for another hour, conversation flowing as easily as it had all evening. Nora had never felt so understood, so valued for who she really was, rather than what she looked like or where she came from. "I've never talked to anyone like this," Nora admitted, as the clock neared 1 a.m. "I feel like you actually see me." "I see someone extraordinary," Dennis said quietly. "Nora, I know this might sound crazy, but tonight has been the most real conversation I've had in years." When he walked her to her door and, in the soft glow of the porch light, kissed her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss deepened, and Nora felt something awakening in her that she'd never experienced before. Before she fully processed what was happening, she was inviting him inside. At 22, Nora had never been intimate with anyone. She'd focused on her studies and work, never finding someone who made her feel the way Dennis did. When she invited him up to her small apartment, her hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. Dennis seemed to sense her inexperience without her having to say anything. He was incredibly gentle, patient, making sure she felt cherished every step of the way. What should have been awkward became beautiful, a dance of discovery and tenderness that left Nora feeling transformed. Afterwards, they lay entwined on her narrow bed, talking softly as dawn crept through her curtains. Dennis traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder, and Nora had never felt so complete. "I should go," Dennis said reluctantly as morning light filled the room, but his arms tightened around her. "But I'd like to see you again, Nora." She nodded, still dizzy from the night's events, and gave him her number with shaking hands. After he left, Nora sat in her kitchen, replaying every moment, every touch, every whispered word. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to fall completely in love. But the fairy tale shattered within hours. Nora was grading papers the next afternoon when her roommate Jessica burst in, waving her phone excitedly. "Oh my God, Nora, did you see the news? Dennis Hayes got engaged. It's all over social media." Nora's pencil slipped from her fingers, red ink bleeding across the paper she was grading. "What?" Jessica showed her the screen. A photo of Dennis in the same tuxedo he'd worn the night before, his arm around a stunning redhead in an elegant white dress. They were standing in what looked like a private garden, both beaming at the camera. The headline read, "Hayes Industries CEO announces engagement to Victoria Ashford, heiress to Ashford fashion empire." Nora read the article with growing horror. The engagement had been in the works for months and was being announced after Dennis's return from a business trip. The piece gushed about how perfect they were together. Two powerful families joining forces, shared business interests, a union that would create one of the most powerful couples in New York society. There were quotes from Dennis about feeling blessed to have found his perfect partner and how they were planning a spring wedding at the Ashford family estate. Victoria spoke about their deep connection and how they'd been meant for each other since childhood. Nora read the article 3 times, each pass making the betrayal cut deeper. The timestamp showed it had been published at 2:47 p.m., less than 12 hours after Dennis had left her bed. She stumbled to her bathroom and was violently sick, her body rejecting the reality as harshly as her mind was trying to process it. How could she have been so naive? How could she have believed that someone like Dennis Hayes would actually want someone like her for anything more than a single night's entertainment? She'd given him her virginity, her heart, her complete trust, and he'd walked away to announce his engagement to someone else. Someone from his own world. Someone who belonged at galas by right, rather than as a volunteer fixing broken equipment. The cruelest part was how genuine he'd seemed. The way he'd looked at her, touched her, spoken to her. It had all felt so real. But it had been performance, a skilled act by a man who was probably already planning how to let her down easy. Nora deleted Dennis's number from her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely hit the right buttons. She couldn't bear the thought of him calling to make excuses or, worse, pretending nothing had happened. 3 weeks later, Nora's world tilted again when she missed her period. At first, she told herself it was stress. The emotional trauma of that night had left her barely eating, barely sleeping. Her body was probably just rebelling against the heartbreak. But when she missed her second period, cold dread settled in her stomach. The pregnancy test she bought seemed to take forever to show results. When the 2 pink lines appeared, Nora stared at them for a full 10 minutes, willing them to disappear. She was pregnant with Dennis Hayes' baby, a man who was engaged to someone else and had probably forgotten her name by now. Nora sank to her bathroom floor, the positive test clutched in her trembling hands, and made a decision that would shape the next 7 years of her life. She would keep this baby, but Dennis would never know. He'd made his choice. And it wasn't her. She wouldn't be the desperate woman trying to trap a wealthy man with an unwanted pregnancy. She would raise this child alone, with love and dignity, and Dennis Hayes would remain nothing more than a beautiful, painful memory. Nora threw herself into preparing for single motherhood with characteristic determination. She moved to a smaller apartment across town, took on tutoring jobs for extra income, and crafted a careful story for her family and friends about a brief relationship that hadn't worked out. When her daughter was born, a healthy baby girl with Dennis's distinctive blue eyes and strong features, Nora named her Emma because it meant universal and whole. This child would be her completion after the heartbreak. The early years were harder than she'd ever imagined, but also more rewarding than she'd dreamed possible. Working 2 jobs while raising Emma alone left Nora exhausted, but watching her daughter grow into a bright, curious, loving child made every sacrifice worthwhile. Emma was everything good about her father with none of the heartbreak. She had Dennis's quick intelligence and natural leadership, but also Nora's compassion and determination to help others. As Emma grew older, Nora occasionally saw Dennis's name in business magazines or caught glimpses of him at charity events around the city. He'd built Hayes Industries into an even more successful empire, and his marriage to Victoria seemed picture-perfect in the society pages. Nora was surprised to find that the pain had faded over the years, replaced by a kind of grateful resignation. Their one night together had given her Emma, and she couldn't regret that, no matter how much the circumstances had hurt. But life has a way of testing our carefully constructed worlds. When Emma was 6, she started complaining of fatigue and frequent headaches. Nora initially blamed it on starting first grade and adjusting to a full school schedule. But when she began losing weight and bruising easily, a mother's instinct kicked in. The diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia hit like a freight train. Nora's world narrowed to hospital rooms, treatment schedules, and the constant fear that lived in her chest like a stone. For over a year, she'd been fighting this battle alone, watching her savings disappear and her daughter grow weaker despite the treatments. She'd never asked Dennis for help because she'd promised herself he would never know about Emma. But now, facing the possibility of losing her daughter because she couldn't afford the treatment that might save her, Nora began to wonder if her pride was worth more than Emma's life. The decision was taken out of her hands on a cold February morning. Nora was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, trying to force down coffee and a stale muffin while Emma underwent another round of tests, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Dennis was saying to someone, "The new children's cancer wing will be state-of-the-art. We want to ensure that no family has to choose between financial ruin and their child's life." Nora's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor and sending hot liquid across her shoes. She turned slowly, and there he was, older, more distinguished, but unmistakably the man who had given her the best and worst night of her life. He was walking with hospital administrators and a beautiful blonde woman Nora didn't recognize, all of them heading toward the elevators that led to the pediatric ward. Nora's heart hammered as she realized they were going to the same floor where Emma was having her tests. The same floor where her daughter, Dennis's daughter, was fighting for her life. She should leave, should grab her purse and find somewhere else to wait for Emma's results. But her feet seemed rooted to the spot as she watched Dennis disappear into the elevator, heading directly toward the child he'd never known existed. 20 minutes later, Nora's worst fears were realized. She was walking back toward Emma's room when she heard her voice, bright and curious, the way it used to be before the illness dulled her natural enthusiasm. "Are you a doctor? You don't look like a doctor." Nora rounded the corner to find Dennis crouched beside Emma's hospital bed, the same gentle position she'd seen him take with other children during charity events years ago. The blonde woman, his wife, Nora realized with a start, stood nearby, smiling warmly at Emma's questions. "No, I'm not a doctor," Dennis was saying gently. "I'm here to make sure kids like you get the best possible care. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma Rodriguez. I'm 7 and I have leukemia, but my mom says I'm going to beat it because I'm strong like her." Nora's heart clenched at her daughter's words, at the casual way she mentioned the disease that was trying to steal her life. Dennis's expression grew more serious. "Your mom sounds like a very smart lady, and you know what? I think you're going to beat this too. You've got fighter written all over you." It was then that Dennis looked up and saw Nora frozen in the doorway. The recognition was instant and devastating. His face went pale, his eyes widening as they darted between Nora and Emma, taking in the resemblance that was impossible to deny. "Mama!" Emma called out, breaking the spell. "This is Mr. Hayes. He's building a new part of the hospital just for kids like me." Nora forced her feet to carry her into the room, her smile feeling like it might crack her face. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Dennis stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. She could practically see his mind working, calculating dates, recognizing features, putting together a puzzle that would change everything. "Nora," he said quietly, her name sounding strange on his lips after 7 years. "You two know each other?" Victoria asked, clearly sensing the undercurrents in the room. "We met once," Nora managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "A long time ago." Dennis's gaze shifted back to Emma, who was looking between the adults with the perceptive intelligence she'd inherited from her father. 7 years? Dennis asked, his voice barely audible. Nora's silence was answer enough. What happened next would shock everyone in that room. Instead of anger or accusation, Dennis sank back into the chair beside Emma's bed, his face a mixture of wonder and devastating regret. "You have my eyes," he said to Emma, his voice thick with emotion. Emma giggled, the sound weak but genuine. "Mama says I have daddy eyes, but I never met my daddy. He's not able to be with us." The words hit Dennis like physical blows. Nora watched as this powerful, controlled man struggled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Victoria stepped forward, confusion clear on her face. "Dennis, what's going on?" Dennis looked at his wife, then at Nora, then at the child who was unmistakably his daughter. When he spoke, his voice was raw with pain and wonder. "Victoria, I'd like you to meet Emma. My daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, calculation, and finally, something that looked like resignation. "Your daughter," she repeated quietly. "I didn't know," Dennis said, his eyes finding Nora's across Emma's bed. "I swear to God, Nora, I didn't know." Emma looked between the adults, her young mind trying to process what was happening. "Are you my daddy?" she asked Dennis, the question so simple and direct that Nora felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. Dennis's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing past the illness to the bright, brave child Nora had raised alone. "I think I might be," Dennis said softly. "If that's okay with you, Princess." What Dennis did next shocked everyone, including Nora. Instead of demanding explanations or making accusations, Dennis pulled out his phone and made a call that would change Emma's life forever. "Dr. Martinez? This is Dennis Hayes. I understand you have a patient named Emma Rodriguez who needs experimental treatment. Yes, I'll hold." Nora stared at him in disbelief. "Dennis, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said firmly, covering the phone. "Nora, I've missed 7 years of her life. I'm not missing another day." He returned to the call. "Dr. Martinez? I want Emma Rodriguez enrolled in the experimental program immediately. All costs covered by the Hayes Foundation." Victoria was staring at her husband with an expression Nora couldn't read. When Dennis hung up, she spoke for the first time since the revelation. "So this is why you could never fully commit to us," Victoria said quietly. "Part of your heart was always somewhere else." Dennis looked at his wife with genuine regret. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I never knew about Emma, but you're right. I never stopped thinking about Nora. I never stopped wondering what might have been." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma with an expression that gradually softened from shock to something warmer. Finally, she smiled, genuine and kind. "She's beautiful, Dennis. You should be proud." Over the next few weeks, as Emma began the experimental treatment that Dennis's intervention had made possible, an unexpected relationship developed. Dennis insisted on being at the hospital every day, learning everything he could about his daughter's condition and treatment. He read to Emma during chemo sessions, played board games with her when she felt strong enough, and held Nora's hand through the scary moments when Emma's condition fluctuated. Victoria, rather than being bitter about the situation, threw herself into helping Emma's recovery. She researched pediatric oncology centers around the world, consulted with top specialists, and even started volunteering in the children's cancer ward. "Why are you being so kind?" Nora asked Victoria one afternoon as they sat in the family lounge while Emma napped. Victoria was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the city below. "Do you know what it's like to be married to someone who's never fully present? Dennis was a good husband, but I always felt like he was holding back part of himself." She turned to Nora with a sad smile. "Now I understand why. He was carrying you and Emma in his heart all these years without even knowing it." Nora felt tears threatening. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," Victoria said gently. "And honestly, I think this is how it was supposed to be. Dennis was never fully mine because he belonged with you and Emma. I can see that now." The experimental treatment was working. After 3 months, Emma's cancer markers began dropping significantly. Her energy returned, her appetite improved, and the light came back to her eyes. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. It looked like Emma was going to beat the disease that had nearly claimed her life. During this time, Dennis and Nora slowly rebuilt their relationship, this time on a foundation of honesty and shared love for their daughter. Dennis explained about his engagement to Victoria, how it had been arranged by their families and how he'd tried to break it off after their night together but couldn't find Nora. "I looked for you for months," he told Nora one evening as they sat beside Emma's sleeping form. "I went to every Literacy Foundation event, every charity gala, hoping you'd be there volunteering. When I couldn't find you, I convinced myself you regretted what happened between us." I thought you were engaged the whole time, Nora replied softly. I thought I was just a mistake before your wedding. You were never a mistake, Nora. You were the most real thing that ever happened to me. 6 months after that fateful meeting in the hospital, Dennis made a decision that surprised everyone. He asked Victoria for a divorce. I love you, Victoria, but not the way you deserve to be loved, he told her honestly. You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart. Victoria, who had grown genuinely fond of Emma and respected Nora's strength as a mother, agreed to the divorce. She did so with grace and dignity, asking only that she be allowed to remain part of Emma's life as her honorary aunt. That little girl has brought out the best in all of us, she said. I wouldn't trade knowing her for anything. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Emma's successful treatment, Dennis proposed to Nora. Not in some elaborate public setting, but in Emma's hospital room during a routine checkup, with their daughter, now cancer-free and full of energy, as their witness. Nora Rodriguez, Dennis said, getting down on one knee beside the hospital bed where they'd first reunited as a family. You gave me the greatest gift in the world without asking for anything in return. You raised our daughter to be kind, brave, and compassionate. You taught me what real love looks like. He pulled out a simple but beautiful diamond ring. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the 7 years I missed? Say yes, Mama, Emma shouted, bouncing excitedly on her hospital bed. I want Mr. Dennis to be my daddy for real. Through tears of joy, Nora whispered, yes. The wedding was small and perfect, held in the hospital's garden so that the children in the cancer ward could watch from their windows. Emma served as the flower girl, proudly walking down the aisle in her little pink dress, her hair finally grown back thick and curly. In his speech, Dennis said, 7 years ago, I thought I lost the love of my life. What I didn't realize is that love had given me an even greater gift, a daughter who taught me what really matters. Nora, Emma, you are my heart, my purpose, my home. Nora's vows were equally moving. Dennis, you saved our daughter's life, but more than that, you saved our future. You chose love over everything else, and I promise to choose love every day for the rest of our lives. Today, Emma is a healthy, thriving 10-year-old who wants to be a doctor so she can help other kids beat cancer like she did. Dennis transformed Hayes Industries into a leader in medical research funding, with the Hayes Family Foundation becoming one of the largest supporters of pediatric oncology research in the country. Nora returned to teaching, but now she works with hospitalized children, understanding firsthand the challenges they face. And Victoria? She found love with Dr. Martinez, Emma's oncologist, and remains a beloved part of their extended family. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the most painful separations. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what truly matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love really does find a way to bring you home. Their story proves that some bonds are too strong to break, that real love can overcome any obstacle, and that the most beautiful families are often the ones that find their way to each other against all odds. What do you think of Dennis's incredible transformation from unwitting father to devoted family man? Could you forgive someone who unknowingly broke your heart? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of hidden truths and second chances moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more incredible stories of love, family, and hope. Remember, it's never too late for love to find its way home.